Okay, I think this is, can everyone hear me? This is Kathy Anderson.
Yes, Kathy, you can hear you.
Okay, are you getting feedback, Jamie?
You sound good right now.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second in the series of webinars that we're doing on home and community-based services compliance monitoring, specifically today focusing on individual rights and the HCBS final settings rule. And I think I will turn it over to the people from Mississippi for some opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. We appreciate you joining us today. This is Betty Pinion with the Bureau of IDD here at Department of Mental Health, and I'm joined by the IDD staff, and we'll just go around the room and they'll introduce themselves to let you know who's joining in today.
Good morning, this is Jennifer Fulcher.
Good morning, this is Deborah Etzel. Faye Foster.
Gary Lewis. Matthew Gordon.
Rita Finney.
Tiffany Howell.
Willis Garrison.
Okay. Excuse me. We appreciate you joining us today. This is the second of 4 webinars concerning the Home and Community-Based Services Final Rule. As you know, one of the major components of the final rule is the importance of protecting individual rights. Site assessments conducted last fall helped to identify some common areas of noncompliance with the final rule. And one of those areas was the need for direct support staff to have a better understanding of individual rights and how to support people in making informed choices. DMH requires providers to discuss rights with persons at least annually, but the assessment revealed a need for direct support staff to have a better understanding of these individual rights. Direct support staff are the people who spend the majority of the time with the people that we serve, where they live, where they work, and where they spend their day. So support needs to move away from traditional ideas of caregiving that see persons with disabilities as passive recipients, but instead we need to base support on giving people choice and control over their lives and helping to support them in getting the life that they desire. Thank you again for joining us today. I'll remind you to do a sign-in sheet or fill out a training form for this session. This webinar will be posted on the DMH website after today's training. The first webinar is already posted on that site. I'll turn it over now to PCG for our training.
Good morning again, everyone. My name is Kathy Anderson, and I am with Public Consulting Group. We have 2 other people from PCG on the line, and I'll let them introduce themselves before we get started.
Hi, this is Amanda Alvey with PCG.
Hi, this is Jamie Cohen with PCG.
Thanks. Jamie, do I have control to move forward, or are you just going to move the slides?
I'm in control of them, so if you want to just tell me when to go next, that would be great.
All right, next slide. I'll just review the agenda for this morning. We've already done the introductions. We're going to go over defining rights. We're going to talk about community integration, choice of settings, individual rights, autonomy and independence, choice of services, and then additional requirements. We will also talk about best practices, modifications to rights, next steps, questions, and then we also have an exit survey. We will pause during the webinar during various parts to see if there are questions at that point in time, and then we will also take questions at the end. So if people, if you don't, as you think of your questions, just jot them down. And I believe we are using the function where you will raise your hand, and then Jamie, are people submitting questions through the chat box?
Yeah, hi, this is Jamie. So I'll be monitoring the chat box. So as we go throughout the presentation, please feel free to send the messages in there. If you would rather ask them directly to me so that not everyone sees them, you can send a private message, and we'll be sure to stop throughout the presentation and address any questions or comments that come through.
Thank you, Jamie. So we'll start first with this slide, which talks about what are rights. And we offer here for you two definitions, one of what is a civil right and what is a human right. And I think it's important, the reason we are showing you this slide is because people often think of this very narrowly as in the requirement to annually review rights with people, and that it's more of a list of rights that you give to people, you hand out, and you look at it once a year with them. You really need to think about, and we will illustrate this throughout our conversation this morning, about how rights really permeate all of the day-to-day activities. So then I think we can go to the next slide. Oops. Community integration, and so this slide is talking about, in the HCBS settings rule, it says that people should be living in integrated and receive integrated and full access to the community. So that plays out through living in the most integrated setting possible, the choices and services and who provides them, and choice in daily activity and schedule. While there may be people, you need to have your staff asking the question, and you should be asking the questions, are these integrated settings where people with disabilities are the primary participants, or are these settings where people from the typical community are taking part in activities and events? Making sure that people without disabilities also use those same services, and that the daily activities and schedules would mirror that of a typical peer that a person might have. Choice of services and who provides them is that is about everyday life. We make choices on the doctors, the clerks we work with, other people we might interact with. And so people that you are supporting should have these same types of choices, especially when it comes to assistance in areas like personal care. We all know that we may have a preference. Some people are fine with someone of the opposite sex assisting them. Some people may not be comfortable with that. And so it is important to understand what kind of a choice a person would make and for them to be able to voice those choices. Daily activities and schedules, we all know, for example, that some of us are morning people, some of us are not, and some of us like to have quiet time before that first cup of coffee or before we start interacting with people. Again, through good planning and knowledge of the people that you support, we could ensure that people have those same choices. Next slide, please. Choice of settings. The setting is selected by the individual from among settings options. That's what the requirement is in the HCBS rule. Again, as we mentioned earlier, setting choices need to be real and knowable by the people that are being supported. Again, that is having the opportunity to look at different homes or different day programs if those options exist. And if they don't exist, what are the choices that can be presented to people? Are there new and innovative or creative kinds of options that may become available for people? When we talk about choice in roommates, I know a number of the homes have private bedrooms, so that is, if roommates are not an issue, that's fine, but perhaps people would want to have a roommate, so that option should be presented to them. If in fact the homes do have bedrooms where people must share, we saw some good things where people were actually presented with the opportunity to discuss with one another about who might make the best roommate, that sort of thing. To the extent possible, really working with people so that they are sharing, if they are sharing a room, they're sharing it with someone that they feel good about. I don't think any of us would want to be in a situation where we spend time in our room with someone that made us feel uncomfortable. The same thing about housemates. I know in many cases people have lived in settings for a long time, but in instances that we discovered, there were some good practices and then some not so good practices on housemates. There were opportunities where people were able to come and visit the home prior to moving into the home, meet with the other housemates, and make a decision about how they would work together or how they would match up. In some instances, we were told people were placed. This is the only option. That is not consistent with the intent of the regulation, and also is not really a choice for a person if you're just being placed. There should be at least some kind of a discussion, and there should be opportunities for people that if they really move in and that isn't working for them, what is the process, and we'll talk more about this later, but what is the process for that housemate or that roommate to change? Next slide. Individual rights. Again, the requirement from the setting rule is the setting ensures an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. Some of the things that we have listed on this slide, and then I'll go back and speak in a little more detail to them. Looking at furnishings, are the furnishings in the home or in the setting in clean and in good repair? Is that a place that you would want to live in? Are there decorations that make that represent the people who live there so that they feel very much so that they are represented in their home? The protection of personal health information, making sure that that is secured and confidential, and that plays out within medication management, personal care, and individual schedules. And then also one of the major areas is privacy, also with visitors and mail. With regard to respect for treating people in age-appropriate manners, making sure you honor choices, even though it might not be your choice. Remember, there's always that balance of rights and responsibilities and educated choices by individuals. Again, they cannot, none of us can make good choices if we don't know the upside of that choice as well as the downside of it. And so we're talking about dignity of risk and making sure there's a balance there for the individuals that you're supporting. With the protected health information, we're talking about protection of privacy as it is required. Think again about how you would want this to be handled for yourself. Train your staff to do things that not just the most expedient approach to getting things done. I know that staff often may feel pressed for time, or there may not be as many staff on duty as you would like, but for example, we did see instances where people were really just kind of in a line to get their medication, and there wasn't an individualized approach where people came in one by one to the room, but it was really kind of a line where people just filed through. That is not really providing a lot of privacy or respect for the individuals. So it's important to make sure that you really think that through about what are the options that are available in this setting. The same thing with personal care, making sure that, as we said earlier, people have the choice of providing that personal care, but that those activities are conducted privately. And then around individual schedules, making sure that people have the opportunity to have flexibility in their schedule. There's probably a routine and a rhythm within the house, but within that we know as we all live our lives within homes and with other people, we can find our own rhythm and set a bit of our own schedule within framework. Again, I think it's important for people to think about that.
And Kathy, the other thing I would add there too is just ensuring, as part of protecting personal health information, that, you know, if you have individual dietary schedules or therapy schedules, things like that, that those aren't posted throughout the setting to where everybody would have access to that same information, that those schedules and any sort of dietary schedule or restrictions are maintained privately as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Great point. Also talking about privacy with regard to visitors, so that people have the time and the space for personal interactions with friends and family, so that they have the ability to have an intimate relationship with another person should they so choose, as long as they're both educated and consenting to that. We talked last time about the importance of providing human sexuality training so people can make responsible choices, you know, based on information, again, balancing knowledge and responsibility. I think this is one area that is often ignored for people and then sometimes leads to people feeling that they must sneak around or be very secretive, or what sometimes gets labeled as deviant behavior. And some of that is a result of the lack of provision of education and information for people. So it's very important to think about that. Also, with regard to mail, making sure that people can send and receive personal mail and get personal information, and that it's not shared with everyone unless they choose to do that. We also had people who would talk about being able to just go to the mailbox and get their mail. Sometimes that was a staff-only responsibility. Other times that was a shared responsibility within a home. I think that people can appreciate the ability. It might be something that they look forward to doing. It might be a responsibility that may be rotated among individuals. We recognize that a lot of times people are not able to read their mail, so they may, but it is important that that mail would be presented to them and then they could unopened, and then they could request staff to read that mail to them. Again, making sure that there are efforts, and so that people know that they have the choice to request the staff support to do it. I think that when some of the things that are concerning is when all staff, the mail goes to one location that is not at the home, and so people can't access it. It comes back to them, and staff, it's already opened, and staff would read them. Those are not the kinds of things that you would want to see or have happening within a person's home. Amanda, did you have anything else to add there?
Nope, not there.
Okay. Next slide. Or Jamie, I should ask, are there any questions that have come through yet?
I have not seen any questions yet, so just a reminder to everyone, as we're going through the slides, please feel free to send any questions or comments into the chat box.
Again, continuing on individual rights on this slide, as you can see, there's, again, the response to needs and preferences. This is respect and making sure that people are treated in age-appropriate manner, making sure that you're honoring their choices, even though, again, as we said earlier, it might not be your choice. Making sure, excuse me here, I think that the secure location for belongings, again, people often indicated that perhaps the secure place they were directed to put their belongings was in a at a day program in a cubby hole, but it might not have been secure from other people. Or in their home, they could put their belongings in a bedroom, but the door didn't lock. So again, making sure that if people have things that they want to protect, that those are available for them so that they can if they have a drawer that locks in their bedroom, or they can lock the door to their bedroom so that they feel their belongings are safe and not something that would be accessible to all. We talked a bit about, okay, go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, to say along those lines too, we heard a lot about how, individuals would say, well, if I want to protect something, staff will hold it for me. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I think especially in the residential settings, individuals should feel like it is their bedroom, it is their home, and that they are at least given other options to protect or secure things that are important to them, rather than those things having to sit in like a staff office or, a staff hold that personal item for them. Just given that things can be lost and all of that, they should have that choice to make sure they can maintain those things that are important to them themselves.
Yes, I think that's an important perspective on it. It's really important. I know some people were very clear that they prefer to keep their valuables on them, on their person, and that was their choice. They had an option to put things in a certain place, but they kept them on their body or in their coat pocket or that sort of thing. Again, making sure it's the person's choice, but making sure that they do have that opportunity so that they don't need to worry about someone taking something that is really important to them. As we mentioned in the beginning, when we talk about people being informed of their rights and having ongoing conversations and the process to file grievances, I think that it really is important. We learned when we were doing site visits that in some homes there actually were opportunities for rights to be discussed both individually and as a group. And perhaps that was something that was an activity that was going on every month. Maybe there was the right of the month or something like that where people really delved into it and had the discussion. I think in other cases you see where it's reviewed at a planning meeting or a pre-planning meeting. People may be given a copy of their rights and sign it. But this goes beyond posting of rights on a wall or in a person's bedroom, that sort of thing. It's really having that conversation to garner understanding and make sure that people know how to exercise those rights also. And along with that goes that process to file a grievance so that people can know what the process is, know who to contact, and also feel that there won't be any consequences for doing so negatively, that there won't be a bad reflection on them because they, in fact, had a concern and expressed it. And I think that that's very important when you have people who are living or working in a situation and they've been instructed that they should share those grievances with the staff who they are working directly with or with a supervisor. You need to make sure that they are very comfortable in that situation and that they do not feel that there is any negative repercussions to them because they've had that concern. Amanda, do you have anything to add on that particular area?
No, thank you.
Also, the expressly no use of restraints. It's, I think that is, and I know that Betty and the staff would reinforce this, but that's expressly prohibited. The use of restraints in Mississippi is not allowed, and so there should never be any indication that that is going on in any of the settings. And I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything with regard to that.
Yeah, Betty or Jennifer, do you have anything you want to add to that point in particular?
No. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Any questions come through the chat box at this point?
I have not seen any questions. Some people are commenting that the audio has gone in and out a little bit. I think the majority of the time it's been okay, but I apologize if it's been going in and out. I'll see if there's anything I can do about that.
Okay. Next slide, Jamie. This slide is talking about autonomy and independence, and again, the requirement, the expectation through the settings regulation is that the setting optimizes but does not regiment individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limited to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom the person interacts. So specifically here, we want to talk about the setting being free from barriers that restrict movement. So we're not only talking about physical access for people, but rooms being off limits for people, whether this would be in their residence or their day program. Again, I think you need to be talking with your staff and asking yourselves, again, why would there need to be a room in a home, a person's home, that they would not have access to? What is the logic for that? What is the reasoning for that? And is it something that is reasonable and could be expected in a typical home or a typical employment or day setting? One of those areas that you might ask questions about are when you have staff-only bathrooms or staff-only break rooms, and those that are separate from the areas that the people who are being supported by those settings, either residentially again or the day or employment service. Why would that be separate? I think that that is something that is often a concern. Also, when you have the physical or environmental assessment issues, we did see some homes where people had access, had a physical issue where they needed to use some adaptive equipment, perhaps a walker or a wheelchair, and they might have been able to enter one door, but there were other doors within the residence or the employment setting that they were not able to access. I think a couple of things to be mindful there are, one, safety and means of egress. Is it possible that that one exit could at some point be blocked, and that would be a danger for the person, so they would not be able to get out of the setting? So you need to think about that. The other is there an opportunity to make the entire building accessible to a person, both the front door and a back door, a front door and a side door, those kinds of things, so that the person has more freedom of movement in the environment that they are living or working in. If somebody should put the phone on mute, we hear someone maybe giving directions to someone. Thank you. We also want to talk about activities that match the age, the skills, and the abilities and desires of the person. So when you start with the desires and goals, of course, that's an essential part of the person-centered planning and making sure that staff know the person, have an opportunity to know what are their life goals, what are their interests, and then taking those interests and goals and matching activities to those. So there's a difference between having people, maybe someone really likes to play a type of a board game or some kind of an activity. Well, there's the contrast that I like to use is, well, Connect 4, which you see people of all age ranges playing, versus Candyland, which is really a game that is something that is played by children as opposed to adults. And so making sure that you're not doing activities, again, if someone wants to do painting or coloring or use color pencils, there are adult color books, even Zen color books, so that you can relax and do those things, as opposed to childish cartoon coloring books. You get the same opportunity to express yourself artistically, but you're doing it in a more age-appropriate manner, which may lead to, and could be based on interests that they have. Also, the type of coloring book or activity books that they're using could be based on interests or skills that they are trying to develop. I think we still have one or two people who don't have their mute on. We keep hearing people's voices pop through every once in a while, so just check your mute button if you would, please. Also, the next bullet here is access to food, and this is one that is meaning that a person can have access to food at the times and places that they want to have food. So this could be a snack or this could be meals. So one of the first areas to talk about is how this plays out with meal times. Are there some flexibility with meal times? Again, we always say within some reason, unless a person is on a completely different schedule. Say someone is living in the home and they are working a 3 to 11 kind of shift. Well, they might come home and have dinner then, and so hopefully that would be accommodated within their schedule. But typically, if people are basically on an 8 to 5, is dinner required that it's at 5:15? Everybody needs to sit down. You have that opportunity. You eat together, you eat what's served, or you don't eat. Now, in some cases, we've heard where people are given choices to have the hot meal with the group, or they can wait and have a meal later. Appropriately, sometimes a plate is fixed and that can then be warmed up, and the person can have their dinner at the time that they desire. On the downside, sometimes people are offered, here's the hot meal everyone's eating now, or if you want to eat later, you can have a bologna sandwich or a, whatever kind of, some kind of peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's not really accommodating because that's not an equal meal to the dinner that everyone else is eating and that the person might actually desire, but they're just not ready to eat at that particular point in time. So it's important to think about meal times and how those play out. In a day setting, lunch times are often, especially if it's in a more of an industrial setting, there might be a couple of opportunities for a lunchtime, but that is typically in most work environments a set time where you have a noon meal or a break meal. Access to food for snacks is something that people may want to snack at different times. Again, think about, are people able to go into the kitchen of the residential setting that they're living in, their home again, and get something out of the cupboard that they would want to have for a snack whenever they want to have that snack? Or do they need to ask staff? Are there restrictions on what's available for the snack or the times that snacks are made available to people? So those are some of the things to think about. Amanda, I'm going to pause because I know you've had some experience with this whole access to food in various settings that you've looked at also, and you have something you would like to add?
Yeah, I think one thing to add is just, you've already talked about this, but just emphasizing that any sort of restricted access should be managed on an individual basis. Obviously, there are going to be individuals in the settings that may have a documented restriction because of let's say diabetes or Prader-Willi. We've seen circumstances like that. So long as that individual may have those restrictions and it's been assessed and documented, and there's a very well laid out plan in their person-centered plan, those types of things are okay so long as they're managed on a one-to-one basis. But when those restrictions because of one person are used as a justification to restrict everybody in the home or everybody in the day program from accessing snacks or certain types of meals or things like that, that's when there would be some concerns in terms of overall compliance with this particular provision in the HCBS settings rule. The other thing, Kathy, we actually have a question that come in related to activities that are matching age, skills, and abilities. So somebody asked if it's okay if an individual requests to watch Mickey or a certain child show or play a child game, so long as it's documented that they requested that.
So my comment would be, of course, if the person is requesting it. But I would want to explore that more to say, is that an informed choice? And by that I mean, do they know that there would be other options for them that they might enjoy? So again, exposing people to other choices and opportunities. I think that sometimes that's something that they've carried through their life, that I like Mickey Mouse, and so I'm always going to like Mickey Mouse, and I want to watch Mickey Mouse, but I may not know that there is something else that is equally as entertaining or that I might enjoy, that no one has ever taken the time to show me to see if that would be more appropriate. Again, we're not talking about forcing people to abandon interests. I suppose we all have interests that could be questioned about, is that age appropriate? But we also don't want to promote or to have the image be of the person as a perpetual child. It's part of helping them see themselves as an adult, growing up with more mature interests, those kinds of things. But you don't do that if you don't have that exposure. So that is, I think, important to think about that too. Has there been other options presented to them? And I heard someone, and I'm not sure if it was you, Betty, did you have something you were going to add? No?
It was Amanda. So I think along those lines, and I think that's a really good example. We've been to settings, so I've seen one in particular where the individual really enjoyed Disney World. And in his room, he had a lot of Mickey figurines or Donald Duck or all of these different things that represented Disney World. But that was because it was his choice. It was what he enjoyed. He collected lots of figurines from Disney World. So just the sheer presence of something that may be generally associated with a child or a younger individual isn't necessarily inappropriate, but as Kathy mentioned, just making sure they have that exposure and they're given true choices. You know, if somebody says, I want to watch Mickey Mouse, and I know I could watch all of these other things, or I could do all of these other things, but this is what I want, that it's complete, that is their right, that is their choice, and there shouldn't be concerns with accommodating that, again, as Kathy mentioned, so long as they know that's not the only choice that they have. We actually have a couple more questions. Kathy, there's another one that came in that says, are the day service adult providers responsible for daily meals and snacks, or is it acceptable for the provider to prepare meals once a week? I think I don't know, Betty or Jennifer, if you want to actually address that one.
Well, that's in our standards. Day service adult providers are responsible for providing those meals and snacks, and that's up to you whether that you prepare the meal yourself or bring it in. But the people should have choices about the food that they eat.
I was also going to, thank you, Betty. I was going to add on to what Amanda was saying about the issue of matching activities and things to age and making sure that they're age appropriate. I think sometimes it takes a matter of, for example, we have been, and I've seen many times where people say a person likes to have a baby doll with hair because they like to comb the hair and they like to maybe dress the doll and those sorts of things. But maybe it's a matter of sitting down also and talking with the person. Maybe there's some other kind of tactile activity that they would like to do where it's the same. Maybe they would want to start, grooming wigs, for example, if anyone had a hairpiece or something like that, or perhaps the grooming of a pet or that kind of thing. You might be able to get that same kind of sensation and comfort. A lot of those times, those activities, if you think about them, are comfort activities that a person might do. So it might have been that they developed that skill and the desire to be involved in doing that when they were younger, and so that was with a baby doll. But how do you transfer that to something as an adult that they might want to do, as far as even grooming or setting their own hair, and how can you expand those options with a person? But you really have to kind of figure out with them what it is that makes that so interesting to them, and why is that something that they want to engage in, and are there other opportunities that you could show them where they could have that same kind of experience, but it would broaden their repertoire of what they're, the activities that they're engaging in. So I think that that's one way to think about it also, just to really start to break it down with the person about what is pleasant about that activity to them.
Yeah, I think to add to Kathy's point, maybe there's a local cosmetology school or barber shop or some kind of community connection that can be made there. And, that can help them bridge the gap. And it can be, if they really like to do hair, things like that, it gives them an opportunity to learn something new. And maybe they have, like a model or something that they can donate to the individual, or even the individual can go into that setting, into the community, and just learn some new things and have that exposure and experience outside of, just having the doll. As Kathy mentioned, maybe it's not really the doll that they're interested in, but more of the grooming and the cosmetology aspect of that. So it's just kind of exploring those things that the individual truly wants, to getting what would make them happy and what they want to do, and then also if you can't forge some sort of connection or make that a community activity.
Thanks, Amanda. And then the last bullet on the slide, which I haven't spoken to, is the choice in who to interact with, and then specifically about group activities. So obviously with one-to-one, people will form hopefully relationships with those other people that they are living within their residential setting, within their community, via their church or some social groups that they may, or civic groups that they might participate in. One of the things that we often saw is there were a lot of group activities where people from the home would all go to do things together. And if you didn't want to be a part of that, then you might have to go to another residential setting. People weren't always allowed or supported to stay home by themselves. And so I think there's a couple of options there to think about, making sure that there are some creative ways to make sure that the group activities are smaller groups, that are things that are only people are choosing to participate in, that people aren't feeling like it's either this or go to somebody else's house. That isn't really accommodating the individual to be in their own home. Are there uses for technology where you could check in with the person to make sure they're okay, starting to develop some autonomy and independence skills? Also, perhaps the person really wants to walk down the street to get an ice cream cone or something, for example. Is that something that they can do with support? Then also people can start to develop some independence in being able to do that walk on their own, being shadowed by staff in the beginning, maybe at a distance. Then perhaps there's a way within technology that the person could learn on their iPhone to say, I've reached my destination, now I'm heading back, those sorts of things. And again, those all are part of the person-centered planning process, but it would be looking at how not just staff-oriented supervision and support for people, but are there other ways people can be supported that allow them to do things separately and independently and not always in groups? Amanda, anything on that?
No, thank you.
Okay, Jamie, any more questions on this slide? Autonomy and independence seem to generate some questions, so if we've got some more questions, that's great.
Yeah, there was one more about if other choices are documented, is that fine or sufficient? And I think in your previous responses, we kind of already addressed that, but if there's anything else you want to say to that.
I would just go back, Amanda, to the example that you used where the person really liked the Disney stuff, and that was probably something I'm making an assumption here, but maybe they went on trips to Disneyland and those sorts of things. I would really be surprised if all of that wasn't documented in the person-centered planning process, but that is something that they're very interested in and like very much, and so that would in fact be a place that it would be documented that is their interest and their focus. I think what is important when you talk about documenting things, and then you can go on and use the and I'm going to use the extreme example. So rather than playing a more adult game, a person is just playing Candyland and just say, we tried this, Connect 4 and they didn't like it, so they're back to Candyland and that's fine. You have to make sure, again, that it's not just an either or, but it is the opportunity to say maybe we're working with them to see if we can transfer that interest from that particular game that may not be age appropriate to something that is more age appropriate, and you're experimenting, and so that there's some trial and error. I don't think it's appropriate. It's not appropriate just to think that if you say we tried it, they didn't like it, we're done. Now we're staying with this. That is not black and white. It really is a process of elimination, experimentation with other options for people. So I think you need to think about it in that way. I don't know, Amanda, maybe I'm not saying that very clearly, but I am trying to think about it. It's a process of experiences with other options, not just in this or that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we get into a couple slides down, we have a little bit more information on what should be documented in a person-centered service plan. So I think that conversation should help address that question as well.
Great. Okay. Are we ready to move to the next slide?
Yes, I think so.
So here on this slide, we're talking about people should be supported to make decisions, again, to move about the community. We've got voting, access to money, and practicing religion. And then we'll talk about each of the other bullets, but let's talk about supported to make decisions. So this is, again, that important aspect of making sure that people have real choices and the information they need to make the decision. And sometimes if the decision is either you get to do something that I'm suggesting to you, or you get to do nothing, that's not a choice or a decision. But for the person to know that if you want to spend all of your money on a rather pricey item like a brand new TV, then that means you may not have the opportunity to do some of the other things that you want to do. You may have to sit out a couple of movies rather than going to the movies because you've either spent all of your money or you don't have the funds to do that. But also sitting with the person so that they understand, I always like to do the pros and the cons. Here's the positive of making that decision, here's the downside of it. But if the person ultimately makes a decision that you may or may not agree with, making sure that you have, and we will talk about this later also, discussed how to minimize the risks that are associated with that decision, but really helping people to develop decision-making skills and processes, and those can be really quite simple, but it's making sure you're not influencing the decision that the person makes. So that, I think it's really important to make sure that there's not undue influence on decisions. And we will talk about this also later. It's balancing that role when a person has a guardian. So we'll talk about some of that in a later slide. Making sure that people are supported to move about the community. So if staffing is an issue and there's not always the opportunity for people to have one-on-one support, what are the other opportunities or options for people to access their community? To think about, is there someone from the Kiwanis Club or someone from a the church association or someone from the Y, where the person might go, or the health club or whatever, because I know Ys aren't all over all of these cities. But if there is a little health club, is there a workout partner that could be established so that the person has someone who might pick them up, or if staff drop a person off at the workout center, there's someone who has taken an interest and has a relationship, and so they have a workout buddy, and that person is now moving not only about their community, but they're starting to establish a relationship with someone in that setting. It could be a pottery, if you have one of those, what are they called, pottery centers where you can go and paint ceramics. And there are either classes, or you can just drop in and do that. People might start to establish relationships, and the staff who work in those settings support all of us who come in there to paint or pottery, help you select the color, help you select the item, that sort of thing. So there's lots of options for people. Last time we spent a fair amount of time talking about supporting people to vote. So it isn't really just saying to people the question, do you want to vote, don't you want to vote, but actually making sure that people have access to education about what voting is, what is that process. And I think almost all cities and towns offer some kind of informational sessions about registering to vote. Certainly various political parties or political groups offer these opportunities to come and learn about the candidates, which when you think about it, is not only an opportunity for people to learn about a process for voting, but also to find and make relationships with people who might have be like-minded. You know, they might share a same interests or have something in common. And so voting is something that isn't just do you want to go cast your ballot or not cast your ballot, but it is learning about a political process. And there's many ways in many communities for that to be a very integrated activity.
Yeah, I think along those lines, to Kathy's point, you know, there are, it does go beyond voting. You know, I know a lot of sites would do current events or little sessions every morning where they'd talk about what was going on nationally, you know, what was in the news. Maybe it was local news, but, you know, if you have individuals that are really interested in what's going on in their community and what's important to them and what's around them, you know, what opportunities do they have in the community for civic engagement, you know, or there's always going to be some sort of community meetings or events, and maybe a lot of them are tied to voting and certain candidates. But, you know, if that's what somebody's interested in and they want to learn more about a particular issue that's more directly impacting their community or learn more about a candidate, what opportunities do they have to attend those events and really demonstrate another level of civic engagement other than just watching the news or discussing it, you know, maybe in a small group every day?
Thanks, Amanda. I think another big area is access to money. We saw both, I think, some very good practice and some things that could use improvement with regard to access to money. Again, sitting with people, talking with them about their resources, what do they have in their, how much money do they have in their bank account? Do they have a budget for the month or for the week? Whatever that is broken down to the level that is workable for the person so that they can gain experience and knowledge about money and how they can, how it is important to learn to manage their money, as well as have that freedom to spend some money without always asking staff. We often heard about people being given allowances versus most adults have a budget as opposed to an allowance. Allowance is something that is where people start teaching children about money. But when you're working with adults, you should be thinking about how are they budgeting their money and then what is the flexibility that people have with that. Pardon? Oops. Okay, somebody was off mute. So thinking about how people can, if they have freedom with that money, so if you have a budget of $20 a week, is that money that I can keep on my person and I can spend it as however I want? Or when we saw some more controlling issues where people had a budget of $20 a week, but they would have to request money when they were going out into the community, take it, and then bring back a receipt for the money, and then turn in the change for that from that dollar amount. And then the next time they went out, they'd have to start that process all over again. That is really very controlling, and so their money, they don't have the access to it in a way that most adults do, or in a way that they're free to learn about spending and the responsibility of the money. We certainly did have people that we interviewed who said that they like to keep all of their own money. They had a special place they kept it. They kept control of it. And then other people who also talked about they would prefer to have the staff, and that they knew they could always get the money from the staff. It's just trying to explore what's the right avenue for the person, and how are you developing skills and accountability that are appropriate for that person. With regard to practicing religion, we talked about this last time, making sure that people have the opportunity. Oh, I just saw a note. Are we having a problem with audio?
Yeah,
Jamie or Amanda? Yeah.
The presenter's microphone seems to be going in and out, making it difficult to hear everything.
I don't know what to do about that. It's not on my screen. It's not showing that it's flickering. Any suggestions from anyone about what I could do differently?
Kathy, are you talking into a headset or into the computer?
To computer. I don't have a headset with me.
Okay, I would just try and stay close to the computer, and maybe that'll help with the distance.
Okay. We'll try that. Sorry about that. I'm sorry that there are audio problems. I'll pick back up on the practicing. Oh, okay. Sounds like maybe that will work. Okay, I'll hold my head very still, pointed at the computer. Practice of religion. We talked about this on the last webinar when we talked about the opportunity for people to be able to pick the religion of their choice, not a house religion or a group religion, and also being able to, if in fact it is not possible for staff to always take 2 or 3 people to 2 or 3 different churches, what are those relationships that can be built with the religion, in the choice of church or religion, so that people can participate, and making sure that that is a real opportunity for people. I know we had a question last time about what if the church of choice or the religion of choice is out of town and is not accessible. Again, I would suggest that there would be an opportunity to work with someone from that church. Maybe there are other people within the town or the city that you're living in who go to that church, and maybe there is an opportunity again to establish a relationship with someone who could provide that ride to and from. So there are, I mean, again, this all is not easy. We don't mean to be implying that this is easy. It is thoughtful. It takes effort on the part of the staff as well as the person in trying to make this work and express these preferences on any of these areas that we've talked about. But it is important because the goal, again, I think Betty expressed it really well, is to support people, to make sure that they are living the lives that they desire, and so that they are supported to learn and develop skills and to lead a very full life. And we all know that in our own lives, these are not decisions that are easy either. We have all had to work at these. Next bullet, choice to remain home. We've talked about this, so I'm not going to belabor that point. Again, people should have the opportunity to spend time in their own home and not have to always move as a group. Next, participating in day programs or employment. Again, people should be given choices about what kinds of day activities they do. People should have the option to pursue employment. Sometimes people say, oh, I asked somebody if they want to have a job, but they said no. Well, again, that's an area where have you really explored what having a job means? Have people had the opportunity to go out and observe people working in areas that might match interests or skills that the person has? Have they had the opportunity to do some volunteer activities to get exposure? So it's really important to make sure that it's not just a question, do you want to work or don't you want to work? But it in fact is a question that has experience and knowledge behind it so that people can make that choice. Participate or lead own chores. We saw a lot of times that people were definitely involved in doing laundry. They were supported to do their own laundry. Many people who were doing that independently. Cooking seemed to be an area that was often reserved for staff. Staff would be doing most of the cooking. Occasionally people would inform us that they were able to do some baking, or if someone expressed a strong desire for cooking, there were often some activities that they were able to do to support the staff in cooking. But I think, again, it's taking a step back and looking at the fact that if a person is living in a supported environment, it is because they want to and are able to learn some skills so that they can move to perhaps a higher level of independence or have more experience with doing these kinds of activities. So cooking, cleaning, laundry, those are all areas where people can be supported to develop skills. And I always like to talk about staff should be doing things with the people that they're supporting, not just for the people they're supporting. There may be some things, of course, that you have to do because it's appropriate you don't just hand a person a knife and let them start chopping if they've never had any experience using knives, because you don't want the person to get hurt. But you could assist them and teach them to do that, or maybe there are other kinds of activities or equipment. I'm showing my lack of experience with cooking, but in chopping, I know that there are items where you can put vegetables in and it will chop them up. So you don't have to really use a knife. It's more of an adaptation, but it's an opportunity for the person to participate and to learn that skill. Amanda, any thoughts on any of those that I just covered?
I think the same thing, kind of along those lines, was menu planning as well. We saw a lot about, menus being selected for individuals, and there was really no true conversation or opportunity to participate in planning menus, and the same thing with, developing grocery lists or going to the grocery store, assisting with that part of the process as well. So I think it's just kind of thinking outside of the box. Again, as Kathy mentioned, we definitely don't want to make it sound like all of this is just easy and you can do this tomorrow and it's no big deal, but really making sure that you think through every one of these steps and find areas where your staff are really just doing all of the work, and seeing if there aren't areas where individuals can, participate a little bit more, being given that as a choice to do so.
Thanks, Amanda. Those were great. The menu planning and the grocery shopping were big areas, absolutely. Any questions that came up from the group at this point?
Yeah, Kathy, we had a question come through, and it asks, can a supervised living home be co-ed? I'm going to defer to Kathy.
This is Jennifer. There's nothing in our standards that prohibit supervised living homes from being co-ed.
Thank you.
And those are all the
Anything else,
questions I've seen so far.
Okay, great. Do you want to go to the next slide then?
Yes.
And Kathy, just to do a check for you on time, we've got about 20 minutes left.
That's what I was just going to say. Thank you. All right, we'll keep moving. I think some of these start to get a little more redundant. So this slide is about choice of services, and this is to ensure that the setting facilitates individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. Again, as you can see, the bullets here are about the choice and support staff, opportunities to update and change the daily schedule, staff are knowledgeable and properly trained, and participation in planning meetings and who attends. So quickly, I will say we talked a lot about choice and support staff. So again, making sure that the person who's being supported has an opportunity to express whether or not they are comfortable with the staff or if they have preference for staff. That's just something that, sometimes people, you can tell by body language that they're not completely comfortable. Also, I know a lot of times we are working and supporting people who do not have verbal skills, but you can tell by body language that that might not be a person that they are comfortable with. They recoil a little bit, they look down, they look away. Those are important messages. And often something you might want to pursue if that's a very negative reaction. But it's important to, again, I know it's not always within reason, but especially around personal care, I think you should be very attentive to that. On the opportunities to update and change daily schedules, again, it's important to recognize, I think we all have routines that we follow, but we also sometimes change up our routines either based on the time of year or based on something different that's going on within our lives. And so for the people that we're supporting, we should not assume that just once we set a schedule, that's the schedule forever and ever. Those activities, and there should be an opportunity to engage with them to see if they want to change those times or what that consists of during their daily activities. The third bullet I cannot express enough. Again, the staff need to be knowledgeable and properly trained about the person that they are supporting. Again, it's disconcerting when we hear staff say, when we ask about a person-centered plan and people say, oh, that's kept at the office. Staff should not only know there is the person-centered plan, they should review that. There's important, valuable information that is a guiding document. It's really just not something, it should be a living document that is utilized to support a person appropriately. It's not something that's a checkbox and then it's done and it doesn't matter until the next year. Also, the participation in the planning meetings and who attends. Clearly, the person who is being supported should be an integral part, if not the lead. I know the lead to the extent possible that they can be supported to lead their planning meeting is appropriate. Some people can certainly just jump right in and lead their planning meeting. Other people might want more support from their service coordinator to assist them. But it's also important for, if at all possible, for direct support professionals to be part of those planning meetings, since they are the person working with the person who's being supported on a day-to-day basis. They will have insights and information. And again, it's an opportunity for staff to feel more engaged and to learn about the person that they're supporting, and also to teach others about what they've learned about the person that they're supporting. Amanda, anything else on that slide?
No, I think that was it.
Okay, any questions from that slide, Jamie?
Nope, I have not seen any more.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Additional requirements under provider-owned and controlled settings. So I think most of you know that if the provider owns or controls a setting, the HCBS settings rule had some additional requirements, and these are listed here. The lease or residential agreement, so that the person is afforded the tenant rights, just like any of us have if we're leasing or renting an apartment or a house, so that we cannot be evicted overnight, so that we have some ability to have some control over when we might want to leave, how that process is handled. So those are essential and very important. We've talked about privacy. Again, people being able to have keys to their rooms as well as lockable doors for bathrooms for privacy. Also keys to the home or the apartment that they're living in. So just as you or I would have, making sure, again, that we know that sometimes people do assessments and have conversations with people about whether or not they want a key. People have also done adaptations where they use keypads so that you don't have a physical key, but it's a number or a code that you might be putting in so that people don't have that issue of losing a key, those sorts of things, but really engaging in conversations about these and assuming that there would be keys and lockable doors, and then if in fact that is not something someone wants, you arrive at that decision. But instead of the decision of no key being the norm, you start with a key would be the norm, and then is that ruled in or ruled out for the person because it's their preference, or there's a process where skills need to be developed. Flexibility in meal times, again, we talk about time, choice, and location. Is there a range of times where people can eat with scheduled meals, and is it a meal of equal or the same standard? If it's a hot meal for everyone at 6 o'clock, is it a hot meal if you want to eat at 6:45? Also, again, choice of what's in those meals. Do you get to participate in meal planning? Do people get to express their food preferences? Are there choices and variety? And then location. Do people always have to eat in the same place? Within a residential setting, that there seems to be more flexibility, and that in employment and day programs, there may be an indoor and outdoor place that might be very typical of what you would find in an employment setting. There might be a lunchroom or eating like on some kind of an outdoor area. So flexibility varies a little bit on the setting. But also, again, if people are not able to eat in their rooms, making sure that people do understand what's the reasoning behind that, what's the logic, and so that they can engage in a conversation about that. I think that we had people who would say, we're not allowed to eat in our rooms, and then we had people who said, I'm not allowed to eat in my room, but it's because we would have bugs, and I don't want bugs, so that makes good sense to me. But so can you see the difference? Some people were given the rationale and understood it, and others were just like, we're not allowed. It's just a rule. That's the way it goes. So making sure that people are engaged in that decision-making process, also if there are limitations. We talked about visitors. Again, on visitors, I think the one thing we haven't talked about was sign-in and sign-out sheets, or visitors having to call and make an appointment or say that they're coming over. There's a difference between the fact that people are required to sign in and sign out or make an appointment to visit, between someone just calling and saying, hey, I want to come over about 7 tonight. Are you all going to be home? To make sure that the person they want to see is going to be available. So I think that visitors is something that we have to think about. There's the balance of the safety and then the flexibility and the choice. And really thinking about how that is managed within both residential and day settings. And there may be, again, there are differences between employment settings perhaps and residential settings, but making sure that that is something that a person understands why there are differences in each of those settings also. Amanda, anything on visitors?
No, nothing else to add. Thank you.
Okay. And then physical accessibility, I think we talked about that. So I'm just going to move on unless anybody has any questions on any of these.
This is Amy. I haven't seen any more questions. So just a reminder to keep sending them in.
All right. Yeah, because I'm moving faster. I'm sorry that we got bogged down in the beginning. Next slide. So on best practices, we wanted to talk about the importance of having clearly defined processes. And as you can see, again, I think these are things that we have tried to include throughout the conversation that we've been having this morning, but making sure that individuals are informed and that the time is selected. This is around person-centered planning, making sure that people know when the meetings are, know what's going on, and know that the place or the time that the meeting is being held is based on what works best for the person and their circle of support. Making sure that you're having ongoing conversations and open communication. Again, as we know, we all change over time, and we can change our mind. Something that might have sounded good in one situation, then as it starts to play out, really isn't working for us. And so there should be that ability to have that exchange of information and to update things. The same thing goes for the changing of services and supports. Again, not set in cement, but something that should be flexible and reflect the person's choices and desires. We talked about the housemates and roommates and some of the best practices around meeting potential roommates, even to the point where sometimes people are able to spend a night or a weekend at the residence to see if that feels good to them. Is that something that is going to work for them as well as their roommates? And if there are issues, how do they discuss those and get those resolved? On person-centered practices, I referenced this before, but moving beyond the planning, so it's just not a document or a process. It is a living, ongoing process. So being person-centered, the practices is not just a plan. It's a person-centered thinking. It's a way of doing business and working with people and interacting with people and really always thinking about all of those things as opposed to the checkbox on the plan has been completed and we'll revisit that in 6 months or a year. And then making sure that the people who are being supported are included in planning that goes on in the setting, whether that be the residential setting or the day employment setting. In fact, there are activity calendars or even just an event schedule that's done. Is that something that there is a process that is inclusive and so that everyone has an opportunity to think about or express what they are interested in doing, and how are those differences, if people have differences of opinion, how are those balanced and executed so that people are not always in a situation where they never really get to do what they want to do. They only get to do what someone else wants to do. So making sure one person doesn't monopolize the process. And then the same thing with menu planning, making sure that it really is reflective of the tastes and interests of the people who are living within the residential setting, so that they can have meals that perhaps they enjoy cooking, or that food that they really are their preferences. Well, of course, those are always developed with people's medical conditions or any kind of dietary restrictions in mind. but there's so much flexibility around that and the ability to substitute things for people if they have either preferences or food allergies or those kinds of things. Amanda, anything that you would add on any of these best practices?
Yeah, two things really quickly with the menu planning in particular. Is a lot of times in what we've seen in many states where we've done this work is cultural considerations. You know, understanding that there are certain areas of the state where there is, you know, very specific cultural preferences for the type of food that they eat. So accommodating those, you know, that plays a huge role in choice there. The other thing with just person-centered planning in general and having these clearly defined processes and ongoing conversations, often when we speak to direct care staff, they're doing a lot of these things on an individual basis. They know the individuals that they support. They learn really just in talking to them every day what's important to them, you know, what they want their life to look like. So it's really taking those conversations and what's occurring naturally and really formalizing that information into the person-centered planning process. Because I do, as I mentioned, I think a lot of this happens, but a lot of it's more informal and natural, which is great. But just, again, making sure that that ends up being into the formal person-centered planning process and reflected in an individual's plan.
Thanks, Amanda. Two important, very, very important points. Any questions from this slide, Jamie, that have come through?
Nope, I have not seen any for this slide.
Okay. Next slide. Modifications for rights. Again, those any kind of rights modifications must be developed through the person-centered planning process. And those should be driven by the individual, making sure that those are well documented and there's a process for it, you know, not only the justification of any kind of a modification, but what is the plan to develop a skill or an accommodation that would in fact result in that modification perhaps not being necessary. Also, person-centered planning, just in general, making sure we talked about this, that the people who participate are chosen by the individual so that they may, if they have a really good friend or somebody who's a good support to them that they would like to have present at the meeting, that that person is included. That's really essential. I think that oftentimes it becomes a little perfunctory of who's involved in team meetings, and so making sure that the person is always asked if there is someone that they want to attend. Again, we talked about making sure it was timely and it's at the convenience for the individual, that the plan reflects the cultural considerations, and also making sure that it uses plain language so that the person and everyone at the meeting has the same understanding of what's being discussed. The strategies for solving disagreements, making sure that if there is a disagreement within the team, there is a process for it where everyone is heard and people can reach either resolution or compromise, and that everyone leaves the meeting understanding what was agreed to and moving forward on the same way, in the same manner, so that they are pleased and there's no disagreement or question about how things will be implemented. Again, making sure that the person has the choice in the supports and who is providing them. The regular method of updating that service plan, as I mentioned before, making sure it's not just something that's seen as being done once a year and never updated. If there are significant changes in a person's life, either their health or just their approach to how they want to do something, that they know that there's a way to update that plan on a regular and ongoing basis. We talked about the importance of reflecting personal preferences and making sure that there is a balance with health and welfare, so that those are not ignored, but they are not the only driving force within a person-centered plan. Are there any questions on this particular slide? Again, I
I
think
don't
the
see any.
takeaways are, I was sorry. I was going to say the takeaways are making sure that people are actively involved and engaged in the decision-making process, and that there's meaningful engagement across the team. I think those are very important. Can we see the next slide, Jamie? Again, person-centered service plans, you know, whether it's under the 1915C or the 1915I, making that can include the self-directed services. If a person is self-directing their services, that is an important part of this. Making sure that there are identified goals and preferences. Making sure you talk about relationships, community participation. Again, I said employment as an option for everyone. If that ends up not being a goal for a person, you make sure that you started there, had the discussion, really are focused on what potential that has. Income and savings, talking again about those areas, healthcare and wellness, education, and other activities that may be important to the person. Again, can't emphasize enough that you need to address with risk factors and how to minimize or mitigate those. But just because there are risk factors does not mean that a person doesn't get to engage in a certain activity or process. It just means you really have to talk about it. So again, you're going into it with knowledge of what the downside might be and how, in fact, a person can protect or minimize those. Very important to think about that. And obviously, person-centered plans have to be signed by all individuals and the people who are responsible for implementing, and that copies of those plans should be provided in whichever kind of a format is appropriate to the person and their legal representative. Next slide. Amanda, you want to do next steps, or do we want to check for questions?
Yeah, so I didn't see any other questions come through at this point. So obviously we are just wrapping up the latest webinar on individual rights, and we have 2 more that are coming up in this series. We have another one on May 28th that will focus on achieving community integration, and then we'll wrap up with the webinars on June 12th and cover a little bit more broadly just compliance with the HCBS settings rule. And that'll just kind of wrap up all the information on this series of webinars. We have included this registration link, and Jamie just dropped that into the chat box as well. So if you want to register for the next 2 trainings, you can click on that link. It will be the same webinar information. Once you register, you will get a bounce back email that confirms your registration and just resend you this webinar information. Jamie has also added an exit survey. So if you guys don't mind, take the time to fill that out. Let us know if there's any information that you found particularly helpful or feel like there's other information that we could have provided. All of that will help us with the next 2 webinars. And then from this series, we're also generating an FAQ document for you all. So that'll help us in building that as well. We do have one more question that come through. They want us, Kathy, to repeat the answer about day services providing meals once a week. The sound was in and out. I know Betty with DMH had referenced there is information in the standards about that being required. I don't know, Betty, if you have information you want to add to that.
Meals should be provided at day programs. If it's a specific questions about the standards, it's clearly kind of laid out in our standards about what is required. So if you have a specific question about it, because I'm not real sure what you're asking, you could just give us a call and we could discuss that individually. Also, I just wanted to add to about the upcoming webinars. We will send out those links in the days before those webinars are actually happening. So just so you know that be looking for that email coming out with that information attached.
I know we are just a few minutes over. Any other questions that you guys have at this moment?
We really appreciate all of the participation from people and the questions that you asked for clarification. And I hope you found this information useful. And we look forward to the future webinars. Here's the contact information on this last slide for people.
Yes, thank you all very much.
I was going to say, any parting words, Amanda?
Yeah, no, great questions. And again, there is an opportunity when you register. You can include, if you think of any other questions or other information that you want provided, you can kind of guide us in that survey as well. So feel free to give us any feedback, positive or negative. We'll take it all. And we thank you all for taking time out of your very busy days to join us for all of this information. Thank you.
Thank you.